You may recognize our next speaker, or at least his voice, from the very popular legal podcast that he co hosts, Geek in Review. Greg Lambert is the Chief Knowledge Services Officer at Jackson Walker in Houston, Texas, and former president for the American Association of Law Libraries, AALL. I've long relied on Greg to stay in the know on what's next in legal, so I'm thrilled he's been able to join us for this year's The Future Is Now conference. Greg, welcome to our virtual stage.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for bringing me in today. Again, this is what I look like, so hopefully my voice sounds familiar as well. I want to talk when it comes to the concept of measuring value. One of the most frequent legal phrases comes into play whenever we say that, and that is, well, it depends. It really depends upon your definition of value. It depends upon what exactly you are measuring and where that starting point is. It also depends upon who is measuring the value. Is it the person or entity that is providing the services, or is it the consumer of the services? And I like to think of it kind of like the term branding. So you can create a brand, you can rebrand, you can define and set what it is your official brand, and you can enforce that brand to your heart's desire. But it's the customer, it's the client, it's that association member, the industry, or that community in which you serve that really defines what your brand is. And I think the same goes when we talk about value. So you can create your value proposition. You can post your value statement on your website and your advertising materials. You can say what your value is all you want, but it is those outside of your office or organization who really determine if you are providing them with any value. So in this talk, I'm going to touch on three pillars in the legal industry and how each one can measure the value that you're delivering to the community. And I'm going to start off with lawyers, law firms, and the allied professionals who provide legal services to support clients. Following that, I want to talk about the courts, its agents like state bar associations and government offices that enforce and provide access to justice in the United States. And finally, I want to talk about the legal education system and the way in which we measure the value it provides to the individuals furthering their education and the legal industry as a whole. And at that point, I'll also bring back our friends at the Bar Association a little bit to talk about their role as well. So I am pretty sure we could have added many more pillars to this discussion, but Mark only gave me 20 minutes to talk, so I'm going to stick with that. So let's start first up with lawyers and frontline legal professionals. And when we look at ourselves, what value do lawyers bring to the community? And I want to start off with a little hypothetical. So let's say that I'm a middle class family of four, and I live in Rockford, Illinois, which happens to be the town I lived in as a child. So there's a high likelihood that I do not have a lawyer's phone number in my cell phone contacts list. If there comes a time when I do need a lawyer, I will most likely do one of two things, and maybe both things. First thing is I'm going to ask my friends or family members, coworkers, if they know of a lawyer. And then if that doesn't work out, I'm going to Google one. And when I do find one, my first assumption is I'm probably thinking I can't afford the services. And this makes me try to think if I can figure out my legal needs on myself, by myself, and do it, or if I can just avoid or give up my legal needs. And hopefully we're talking about a civil or commercial need and not a criminal issue. But even so, once I determine that I can afford your legal services, there is so much uncertainty in my mind that I'm either going to completely rely upon you to walk me through step by step everything I need to do, or I'm going to come at you with some kind of with a bad attitude. Perhaps it's a bit of an extreme scenario, but I would bet that many of you have been either the lawyer in the situation or maybe even the client in the situation. There are just so many obstacles in this person's path to get to someone who can help them that it's difficult to even find a starting point to measure. Ultimately, the value for the client is the resolution of their legal needs. But there's so much in the process just to get them in the door that is dysfunctional that according to the ABA, some 40 to 60% of legal needs for the middle class go unmet. And if we're looking at a starting point to measure, this is a glaring example. And even not surprisingly, businesses and large corporations even have legal needs that go unmet as well. So depending upon your client base, one measurement of value is to find the baseline of how many steps it takes for them to get to you. Reducing that struggle has tremendous value to the client and the community as a whole. Next up, I want to look at government and quasi-government entities in the legal industry. What value are they bringing? What's the baseline, and how can it be improved to provide more value to those seeking access to justice? So at this point, I'm going to do my best Uncle Ben Parker impression and say that with great power comes great responsibility. And, the justice system in the United States has awesome, awesome powers. People literally come before these institutions to seek a determination on their livelihoods, their wealth, their property, and in some cases, even their lives. And as I mentioned before, the ultimate value in these institutions is the fair delivery of justice to those who come before it. And yet, we've created a system where, just according to the Self-Represented Litigations Network, their research determined that somewhere between 60 and 100% of cases in family, in housing, and in consumer litigation matters, that those involve at least one party who shows up self-represented. So we found our baseline measurement here. The way to increase value doesn't necessarily mean that we have to station lawyers at the door of every courtroom ready to jump in and help. But we are a self-regulated industry where the institutions setting the rules for engagement to justice are the very same institutions that are administering the justice. So one measurement of value might be what court here in Texas did in Travis County, where Austin is located. And they did this a few years back, and that was to improve the overall wait times in the courts, specifically by targeting pro se litigants in particular cases and assisting them through the administrative and paperwork process before they even got in front of a judge. So in Travis County, one of the interesting rules there is that lawyers do not have priority over the pro se litigants when it comes to matters. So the longer it takes for a pro se litigant to resolve their issue, the longer it takes for the lawyers to get even in front of the judge. So by creating a process where the pro se litigants had to go to the self-help center to have their documents reviewed and given a logistical assistance in making sure that they had everything filled out, that it was signed and complete before being sent back to the courtroom, that significantly improved the number of cases that court could handle during the day. So when you do something like that, who sees the value in improving wait times? Well, obviously the pro se litigants do, but also the lawyers who are representing clients in that courtroom, as well as the judges and the administrators and staff of those courts. Everyone benefits from the improved efficiency of pro se litigants, and it doesn't mean assigning them a lawyer to represent them. Another interesting fact about this program is that Lisa Rush was the person behind looking at this issue and coming up with a plan to improve the process that provided better value to the community. Lisa Rush is a librarian, not a lawyer. And as I've mentioned before, the legal industry is self-regulated, with the members of the individual state Supreme Court typically overseeing how the industry works and the rules that it must follow. These courts, with their ability to determine how justice is administered, wield great power. Now, I want to quote a friend of mine, Kat Moon, who's a professor at Vanderbilt Law School. She once channeled her own version of Uncle Ben about the value of the legal industry and its self-regulation. And on this one, I'm going to have to paraphrase. So hopefully Kat's not here. And if I don't say it right, Kat, please forgive me. But she said, it's perfectly fine that the legal industry is self-regulated. However, there are certain things that we simply are unable or unwilling to do. And in those instances, we need to realize our power of self-regulation and step aside and allow others to fill that gap. If we want to improve the overall value of accessing and administering justice in the United States, we have to understand that the members of the bar are but one piece and should not be the only answer when it comes to access to justice. And speaking of the bar, I'm gonna toss them in here because while typically the individual state Supreme Courts set the rules for practicing law within its state, the Bar Association is really a close advisor to the court. So the value of the state bar associations typically revolve around improving the administration of justice and the overseeing that members of the bar are competent, ethical, and professional in their duty of practicing law within the state. So one of the core complaints when it comes to the State Bar Association, typically centers around one that first value statement says of improving the administration of justice. Is that measurement based on how well the bar protects the industry or how effective the administration of justice is for the citizens of that state? Now, I know you've probably, and I've heard it from the previous speakers, about stories about what Utah and Arizona and others are doing with their legal regulation sandboxes. And I know that Illinois has stuck a toe in to check out that sandbox idea as well. But when it comes to value, I'm going to go back to what my friend Kat Moon said and tell the state bars that if you know your administration of justice has giant holes in it and your members are unable or unwilling to fill that void, then to improve that value, you need to allow others to come in and fill it. All right, last but not least, let's talk about the value of the legal education system here in the United States. And I think we all know the process of turning students into lawyers has a difficult value proposition for a majority of the students who go to law school. I had to look back when I went to law school at the University of Oklahoma. My first year tuition was $3,000. The tuition currently for an in-state school is around $30,000 a year. For private school, it's around $52,000 a year. If you add to that the living expenses for students for a 3-year public school, talking about $130,000, and for a private education, you're looking at north of $210,000. For students in the top percentage of those graduates who go on to big law jobs, those costs might be completely justifiable and debt can be paid down or off in a few years, especially if you go off and land one of those now $200,000 plus dollars a year associate jobs. But that leaves a large majority of law school graduates who have a large debt load on their back for decades. With lawyers starting off, you're going to be very fortunate to make $80,000 to $100,000 a year, and some will make far less than that. So what other effects does a high-cost law school system cost for the community as a whole? One example is, according to one study, about 20% of America's population lives in a rural area. However, only about 2% of the nation's small law practices are located there. And according to the authors of that study, that actually may be an overestimate about how many actual lawyers are in those communities that are actually serving the community. They're just legal deserts out there. And while there may be many, many reasons for that, the cost of legal education is one significant contributor. So what are some of the ways to reduce the cost of law schools without reducing the overall value of having a law degree? I like to reference Indiana University's Maurer School of Law's Bill Henderson on this. who has suggested that one of the ways that some schools could lower the cost of providing law school education would be to create a one-to-many faculty allocation, where law schools create something similar to what happened with the American Law Institute when they redid the restatements, and apply that concept to core classes. Courses could be centralized or perhaps taught asynchronously through a certification program. So what we need to ask ourselves about the value of legal education is, do we see the value in the eyes of the student and the cost burden, or do we see the value of the aspect from the school and its prestige? When those two go up against each other, which one wins out in the great scheme of things? Now, I want to bring our good friends from the Bar Association back at this point, because it really controls that bridge connecting law schools to the legal practice, and primarily through the bar exam. So how do we measure the value of the bar exam? So let's go back to that second part of the value proposition of the state bar, and that is that members are competent, ethical, and professional in their duty of practicing law within the state. Now, the pandemic was not very kind to the state bar exams. In fact, it caused many law professors and others to call for the abolishment of the bar exam. So does the person who takes and passes the bar exam after spending 3 or more years in law school and tens of thousands of dollars in cost, are they more competent, ethical, and professional than someone who did all of that, but then at the end of the day doesn't pass the bar? I know the defenders of the value of the bar exam would say that, well, that does prove competency. But does that really mean that it justifies preventing these graduates from practicing law while they're either regroup and try again in 6 months, or some of them just give up on becoming a licensed lawyer at all? Is the value all or nothing? So can the value of the Bar Association, their statement of administering justice for the state, be benefited at all by providing an alternative track to the limited or full practice of law? I know many states are looking at our alternatives to the bar, but this is probably one of the strongest areas of legal practice that is most resistant to change. And so does the state bar value the consistency of its rules, even if that means it reduces the value of the administration of justice within its state? That is something that each bar member and the justices and members of the bar, who set those rules, they're going to have to look at that and determine what that value is. The legal industry has tremendous value in America. The rule of law and the administration of justice are core principles of our society. But the individual who cannot obtain justice or cannot afford access to the courts or to a lawyer, they see the value of the system differently. As members of this industry, whether you're a practicing lawyer or an allied professional, we need to see the true value of the justice system through the eyes of those who are limited or completely shut out from obtaining justice. That is our starting point when it comes to measuring our real value. And once we realize that, then and only then can we truly begin to measure our advancement or decline in value.